I literally walked right up to stage after that and announced the next event.
That's great.
Yeah. But, after like, then the next event was going to be a year down the road. I'm like, oh, I have plenty of time to worry about that. Like, cool. Well, then as it started to come time to plan it, man, it was just like, I made a decision purely based on money versus like what's best for like you said, like what's it pulling you away from?
Martians landed.
Yes.
Wearing Prada suits.
Yes.
Drinking Henry Seltzer.
Yes.
Chewing juicy fruit.
Yes, and?
Your branding here.
Yes, brand.
Your message here.
Yes, and?
A verse about
Yes.
your product here.
Yes.
I'm Hirsch Redfin.
Yes, and?
I'm a message therapist.
Yes.
And I have a podcast.
Yes, brand.
That's right, that's it.
Yes.
We'll help you fix the world.
Yes.
Or your bottom line.
All right.
Your bottom line.
Get it. I get it. Welcome to the Yes Brand Podcast.
In the Yes Brand hot seat today is Jordan Duggar. He's a former opioid addict, and he's turned eight-figure serial fitness entrepreneur, real estate, angel investor, physique and human optimization nerd, which he will tell us some about that, but I have a sense of where he's going with it. And alongside his wife, Erin, he has founded two seven-figure online coaching businesses that have generated more than $27 million in total sales since 2018. So this is our ideal Yes Brand interview because it's got the human interest that I often feature in my other show, Truth Tastes Funny, and it's got the business side of things, which we love to explore in Yes Brand. So Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, brother. Love the theme of your show. You got a really cool setup here, amazing studio behind you. Honored to be here, man, and excited to chat with you.
Thank you. Likewise. So tell us a little bit of your story pre-business.
Sure. I'll give you the quick version, man. Grew up in a real small town. My graduating high school class, I believe I had 50 or so kids in it. And growing up, from a farm, rural country, Southern Ohio, I bounced around a lot between different schools. I was a troublemaker, and I had a pretty good family structure up until the age that I turned around 11 to 12. Things started to kind of fall apart. Parents got divorced, typical story that you might find with a lot of families nowadays. But my mom and dad both kind of went off two different beaten paths throughout that divorce. And what happened was my mom started dating a lot of replicas of my dad, losers, drug addicts, alcoholics, things like that. Guy she was with for a long time was a cocaine dealer. And so I was like exposed to this kind of drug culture at a young age. And those were the male father figures that I was around. My father was also, abused substances growing up. And like early on, I started smoking marijuana, for example. Like my very first time I did that, I think I was like 11 or 12. And then that carried into, just a host of substance abuse issues throughout my teens. And then I kind of got my act together in my late teens, got into college somehow by the skin of my teeth, finished school, and was actually on a pretty good trajectory. Like I got my economics degree. I felt like I was finally starting to gain some ground. Then what happened was I tore my Liz Frank ligament in my foot right after I graduated college. And so this was in 2012. And this was like literally the day after I graduated. I had just gotten what I thought was an amazing job, right? The job that you hope to get out of college, which looking back, it was like a 50K a year selling commercial kitchen equipment job. So not the best job in the world, but I was still pumped. Anyways, tore my Liz Frank ligament. It's 1 in 500,000 orthopedic injuries a year. Literally the strongest ligament in your body, the hardest one to tear. So lucky me. So what that evolved into, this was during 2012 when the opioid epidemic was at its height. Doctors were just prescribing pain pills like Pez dispensers. And so I just got way overprescribed. And I don't think it was a malicious intent by my doctor. It's just what they were doing at that time. And man, that kind of re-flashed back all these love relationships that I had with opioids growing up, stealing my dad's pain pills, like buying them from kids at school. And it just clicked, man. Next thing I knew, that went on for about a year and a half where I was, buying Percocet 30s off the street. I was hiding in my closet, snorting them with my girlfriend. And it was like a deep, deep kind of cycle, in and out of surgeries. I had 3 surgeries over the course of 3 years. And finally, it hit a culmination point, like the rock bottom, if you will, right? When right around 2013, if you've ever seen any shows like Dope Sick or anything around the opioid epidemic, that's when the FDA and the finally the enforcement agencies started to come in and make pharmacies communicate with each other, like kind of crack down on the overprescription thing that was going on. Well, my doctor was like, hey, I've got to stop prescribing you. This is the last thing that I can do. And I begged him and begged him for one more. Man, just give me one more, this will be it. So he did. And I rushed to the pharmacy that day. And I happened to get there right when they closed. So it was CVS, got there like at 6:05. They closed at 6. I'm out of pain pills. So I went home, started to go into withdrawal. I'm sweating. I'm like, God damn it, I can't get a hold of any of my dealers. And at that point, I had the opportunity to go get heroin, and it was a decision that I had to make, right? Like it was accessible, because my dealer was like, hey, I'm out of perk 30s, but I do have some black tar. Like, man, so, I had a decision to make there. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to wait for the pharmacy to open the next day. So I drove to the pharmacy at 2 a.m. and I sat in the parking lot until 9 a.m. for it to open, and defecated on myself, threw up in the parking lot, filled that prescription, went home, took one, poured the rest out, spent 2 weeks in my apartment, just working through it, got over that.
Yeah.
And then, man, soon after that, there's a whole nother trajectory as to how I got to where I am today. But really what I learned was apply, like, dude, see, addicts are the most resilient and persistent people you will ever meet. They will do they'll sit in a CVS parking lot and shit on themselves just to fill that last script. And so what I learned, man, if I can just take that same persistence and relentless attitude and apply it to something else and create that feedback loop, that dopamine feedback loop that I had with drugs, if I could apply that to something like business, then, man, I have a shot. That's what I ultimately eventually did.
Yeah, but you Jordan, made that decision. First of all, a couple questions, a little bit to unpack there. When you kind of got yourself together, the pre-accident, injury, you hadn't gone into recovery.
No,
right? Because I know a lot of people who've been through recovery and they won't take any pain meds out of fear of exactly what you described. But because you kind of were just like, okay, I got my shit together. Now I'm going to just, have a normal life. But then you experience this injury, and it kind of slipped you back into habits that, you thought you had kind of left behind. Right.
Exactly.
And then the other thing is you did make it, that as sad as it sounds to recount that night in the CVS parking lot, you did make a decision not to make it worse.
Mm-hmm.
And you probably already made that decision that was going to be the last time that you did, because so many people could have made that decision. Well, I'll get the black tar. This is once.
Just once.
I'll just get it this way. And that would have been a much harder thing to come back from. So there was an awareness again within you that you were gonna you had to get out of this situation. This wasn't what you wanted to do. Yeah. But now tell us what with the awareness that you were gonna change the trajectory. What changed about your approach to business?
Yeah, I like what you said there. I think that all makes a lot of sense. Well, what changed then? So I actually was very fortunate to grow up in a household of entrepreneurship. So my dad was a serial entrepreneur, never had any big home runs, a bunch of base hits. He owned a small, maybe like $1 to $2 million a year business in small town London, Ohio. And I grew up like reading Entrepreneur magazine, and like he was like always swinging and trying to take chances. I remember one time I came home from school, and he had all of these energy bars stacked up throughout the entire house. And I was like maybe 10 or 11. And my mom and him were arguing because he spent their last like $15,000 in savings to go buy and manufacture all these energy bars that he was going to try to distribute and sell, and never sold any. But what I kept learning, just like being around that, was like, man, if you just have like a refusal to do anything aside from make entrepreneurship work, then eventually you will get something to work. It's just like such persistence that, like, I can't work for anyone. And that's what I kind of learned from my dad. But to answer your more specific question, man, what that whole experience taught me, I think more than anything, is like how scary it is to be on the outside, how scary it is to be, hopeless and dependent on something that you have zero control over. See, I personally like the uncertainty that comes with business. And most drug addicts in a lot of ways like uncertainty. It's like that. Like the drug addict loves the feeling of about to get almost getting the drug, of waiting for the dealer to show up more than the drug itself. And in a lot of ways, man, that's business. If we can start to fall in love with the process of doing the things and the repetitive actions more than the actual payoff, more than, let's say, the big revenue day, the big launch, the big this or the big that, that's how you start to create these feedback loops that drive you towards process rather than being like, oh, I'm only going to be happy in my business as a conditional dependent upon if something goes well or it doesn't. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's an interesting insight that I didn't really recognize before, that it's this anticipation and this not knowing, because we're all familiar with, that sense of getting the fix, finding it somewhere, going to great lengths, leaving things undone. But the rush of the adventure in and of itself is something I hadn't thought about lately. And that's really interesting,
Yeah,
because
man.
that's what, as entrepreneurs, that's what we have. Because I
Yeah.
have that. I
Yeah.
have that. And yet, there were all kinds of other things I had to work out that would get in my way, limiting beliefs about certain things. Comfort's like a killer. You get comfortable with whatever you get comfortable with. And that may not be what you want. It just is a distraction. Comfort's a distraction, I think.
Sure is. Yeah, I'm sure you've had those those realizations, and it's easier to say now after you've had some success, right? You tell somebody who's maybe new in business, hey, like your first 100,000 you make or 200,000 you make, that's going to feel the best. Everything beyond that, it's not going to feel nearly the same, which for me was really true. But it's like easy for you to tell them that when you've already done it, right? It's like it's hard to not think about business more holistically, in my opinion, until you're not broke.
Yeah.
You're not broke. All that matters, or if you're broke, all that matters is not being broke. But
Right.
once you do have a couple, let's say a big launch or, a big month or something, once you do that, then you realize that, man, the fun is in the anticipation of that way more than the thing actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a way, that's great. I mean, what that speaks to, when we start to talk about business, that speaks to, just the short celebration period, the short honeymoon period after you achieve a certain success. And then knowing that the you that's, Matthew McConaughey made that famous Oscar speech that
Yeah.
some people thought was funny and other people kind of got it, but I didn't get it till later, which was, it's the you 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that's your hero, or that
Yeah.
you chase. Now I understand it, because the idea is that it no longer becomes exciting. Repetition is not exciting. Repetition is great when you're talking about scalability, but repetition is not exciting when you're talking about, that's okay. When you're talking about growth and
Yeah.
achievement, and and that's what separates the entrepreneur. And I think, actors, producers, things like that, artists can also be seen in the same vein. They're not wanting to just do the same thing over and over again even with a good result
Yeah.
or a
Yeah.
stable result. They just want something more,
Yeah. Yeah. Which in a lot of ways is like the entrepreneur dilemma, right? It's like, it's if you are truly that entrepreneur, the idea person, the visionary, it's really hard to just stay on track, like repeat successful actions, just do more of what you're currently doing.
Yeah.
So you have to constantly rein yourself back in. I know I struggle with that a lot.
Well, you and Erin also had an interesting situation in that you created this functional health coaching company, T4E Systems, and then you got pregnant with a child, and you were like, okay, we're now going to have a family. We want to have more time. And you exited that
Yeah.
business, right? Can you talk a
Correct.
little about that?
Yeah, so that kind of came about. It's interesting. Erin and I are partners, of course. So Erin and I have been partners in these two businesses. The two businesses that we founded, one is the health functional coaching company, T4E Systems. We founded that when we first got together. Soon after that, her and I, it's funny, side story, we went on a reality TV show together. We launched a podcast together, did a few side projects with one another, and just really fell in love with our working dynamic. We have really complementary skill sets and things that we're interested in. And we're like, man, we make good partners. So we decided, well, let's launch this other business, Impact Fitness Coaching Academy. We did all those things and everything was working, man. Everything we did worked really well. And then it got to a point where Erin was trying to get pregnant. We were trying to start a family, and you have children, I assume, right?
Yeah, 5.
Yeah. Right on, man. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
It's like during pregnancy, like things change, like you just can't expect the same work output, the same things as you would otherwise. And like, I didn't want Erin to raise the kid or to even like in conception for the kid to be in a stressed environment. So I'm like, look, I want you to step out as much as you possibly can. I'm going to bear the burden of all this extra workload and everything else. And then we just sat down and talked about it. And we're like, man, why don't we just try to sell this company? We're like, well, can we? And I'm like, it's pretty professionalized. Our books are in good order. It's got a good team. It's got good MRR. Like, let's see if we can. So what I did, dude, personally, it's a good lesson in just like carpet bombing and reaching out. I literally made a list of every company in our space that was bigger than us. Had a list of like anybody I could think of. I was asking around with a list of 50 people, and I just carpet bombed emails. Send them our financial report. Well, I sent them an NDA first. I'm like, hey, I'd love to show you our business, see what it looks like, in acquiring it. And sure enough, the very first email I sent ended up being our buyer. I sent another 48 more, but the very first guy I sent it to was like, this looks like a good deal. One thing after another, those acquisitions take forever. But a year later, we're signing the lines. And so a lot of people think when selling a company, like the lesson that I learned there is like, sometimes you have to go out and ask somebody if they want to buy your company.
Yeah. Well, and I know of situations in other industries where, people have spent years and years, 5 years or so, talking about the other company buying them, but it's the bigger the big company is, the harder it may be, because the less autonomy the owner or the CEO may have. But in the in the online health coaching business, as I understand it, it's even more rare to make a sale like that. Why is that?
Well, it's a business model that's very guru dependent, right? Like if we think about what makes a sellable company, I think one of the most important things is, can you acquire customers without the brand of the owner? And like,
oh yeah,
right. And so for us, there was a lot of dependency upon the brand in some ways, but we'd also figured out certain acquisition systems and strategies that didn't require Erin to be the face of the brand, me to be the face of the brand. There was still some dependency there, but we were able to show, hey, we had a positive referral turnover, meaning our churn, the customers that were leaving were less than the customers that were being referred. So just by that pure nature alone was like, hey, the business will grow without us. Then we also had a really strong email list. We had a strong brand organic presence, not Erin, but just the T4E Systems brand. So that was an asset there. We also had some paid ad strategies that were working. And so that helped. But then really the kicker was, we're like, okay, well, we'll do a earner buyout, or a performance buyout rather. So we're going to stay on for a year, and a big chunk of that sale, I think it was like $400,000 worth of that sale, is going to be dependent upon Erin still helping to just drive business into the company. So, which is great for us, because if all she has to do is like drive leads and we don't have to do anything else, that takes 80% of our workload off of our plate. So that's really what allowed us to package that deal. We stayed on as advisors. Erin still pushed traffic and leads into the system, but we didn't have to do anything else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And, there's the attachment to the outgoing or the selling, CEO, let's say, is not unusual in that, wanting them to stay, or wanting there to be a succession, set up in place, so that the buyer knows that they're buying something that's going to function with or without that person or that team. That happens. But I see what you're saying about the when it's a personal brand. I certainly understand and I'm dealing with that with a lot of clients who are wanting to find that transition within their one of the big things that I focus on now is separating the personal brand from the corporate brand, when they want to start to make that separation, or at least lay the groundwork for it. And also, interestingly, figure out who they are. Like, who am I without my company?
Yeah.
That's
interesting. Yeah, it's with service-based businesses, at least like transformation businesses, right? Do you work with a lot of transformation-based like service? Yeah. It's interesting because like it's a competitive space, right? There's low barrier to entry. And the only way that I think it works is if you have a really great, unique method or unique vehicle that you get your clients results, right? Like an offer that uses a really unique mechanism or method that allows you to separate yourself that way. Because otherwise, if your method is similar to, let's say, other people in the industry, for example, let's take health coaching, right? So if as a health coach, we just do the general personalized workouts, let's say lab work, customized nutrition. If there's nothing unique to separate the method from everybody else, then you're too reliant upon you as the brand to be the thing that separates you from everybody else. Now, if you have both of those things, then getting business is pretty easy. But it's challenging, right? Because everybody kind of does the same thing. You have to have like a way to separate yourself. If you want to separate your brand from your personal brand from the corporate brand, whatever you do to get your clients results has to be the thing that's like, oh, that's different than what I've ever tried and seen. So I'm going to buy due to that reason, if that makes sense.
Right. Right. And then later, Impact Fitness Coaching Academy, that hadn't been formed yet, right?
No, it actually had.
It had. Okay.
We ran both companies simultaneously. It was kind of interesting how we did it. We would do launch models. So we would launch IFCA, the Fitness Business Mentorship Company. We would launch that and do like a 12-week fulfillment round. And then we'd go back to the fitness business and do a fitness launch. And we would like toggle between. And we would take our teams and just like, we're moving over here now. And then we're moving over here now. So we were doing both simultaneously until we sold T4E. Yeah.
Okay. And as I've said, and as listeners know, I like to get into the current business, or the current identity or brand. I mean, it's a natural segue to say, okay, so, what about, Impact Fitness Coaching Academy and what's going on with that? And how are you branding and marketing that with what you've learned along the way?
Yeah, dude. Well, I'll tell you exactly. It's funny. I actually wrote a blog post on this just the other day where it's like, here's the exact marketing system that we've used in Impact Fitness Coaching Academy over the last several years. Like, this is exactly what we do. And it's very similar to what we did in our fitness business as well. So I'll just like break it down. So like step one, organic, right? I think organic is like an important pillar of your company. And I'll explain how we do things organic wise. So Erin and I both have personal brands that we have a team that we kind of repurpose stuff. So what we do is I record podcasts, 2 podcasts a week. And a lot of our value-based content stems from that. So we record those podcasts, we clip small micro soundbite clips out of that. We transcribe it, pull emails out of that. All the value-based content gets redistributed across Erin and my page. We have YouTube, we have LinkedIn, we have a brand Instagram, we have all these different channels that stuff kind of gets splattered. Simultaneously, Erin and I sit down and we create brand-oriented content, things that get people to know, like, and trust us. Usually like once every couple of weeks, we create a bunch of stuff and that gets dispersed too. So it's kind of like a shotgun approach and we just like recycle stuff. And so how we think about this is like 70% value, which is more like how-to content, how to solve problems your ideal client's dealing with, 20% connection, personal stories, demonstration of our values, our beliefs, things like that. So that's how we handle organic. So from there, we go to every month, we try to make at least 10% of our content making offers. I think that's where a lot of people miss. They don't ask for the sale enough. So, we make different offers with our organic. Okay. So that's like how we try to drive traffic from organic. Now, the third thing is the podcast. The podcasts are a big like bottom of funnel thing for us. So our email lists, our ads, our sales follow-ups, everything is driving people to podcasts because, dude, you probably know this running a podcast. If you have some long form piece of content platform, it could be YouTube, it could be podcast, whatever. If you can get people into that and spend some time with you, they're going to become buyers. Then they're going to be like lay down sales.
Right.
So then from there, we also send 5 emails a week. Okay. So that's usually repurposed, like same strategy in terms of value to connection and offers. We just apply that to our emails, right? So it's like 70% value, maybe 20% connection, 10% offers. From there, we run ads. So this is like our top of funnel. This is where most of our leads come from.
Yes.
We spend anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000 a month on leads. We have 2 different funnels we run. We run one just lead magnet funnel that's purely value-based, give. We drive people to a Facebook group. We put them in our email list, SMS, etc. The second funnel we run is more of a middle of funnel, like it's a VSL. Here's how our offer works. We have appointment setters who outbound text and dial every lead. We have inbound applications we get. And right now, of that $90,000 we spend, we get about 250 book calls, about 170 live, close about 50 deals a month, and things just kind of crank from there. Oh, yeah,
that's
one more piece.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, this is really important. We do monthly webinars once a month. So it's just once a month live training that we drive all that traffic we're getting. We do an event once a month where all we do is present on our thesis, like our mechanism, and then we make an offer. So that helps kind of like drive that bottom of funnel traffic to calls too.
Yeah, that is great. And I was going to ask about, because we touched on the personal brands, but now what is your and Erin's commitment to, if any, to IRL, like real life events, because you have this online business, but do you engage in that?
Yeah. Are you asking specifically, Hirsch, like how much we're involved in in-person type events, or are you asking more of like how much we're trying to insert our personal brand and connection into our marketing system?
Well, they're both good questions. I meant the first. I
Yeah.
meant the first part. So let's start there.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a great topic to talk about, man. We've been big on events since the beginning of the company. I kind of left that part out. So we've actually hosted, so there are two different types of events, the way that I think about it. There are like lead generation, marketing oriented events, and then there are fulfillment events, right? Like for your clients. So we still do 3 fulfillment events a year. We actually just had one 2 weeks ago where everybody in our back end program, our mastermind, they come, we do a whole thing, 2-day event, all that. That's not to drive any new business. That's just to fulfill and create retention and create community. So we still do those. But dude, we used to do these big ass events. And so we had 6 throughout the course of the last 4 years. It went from like 50 people to 100, 300, 500. Our biggest one was 700 people. And dude, it was a lot. It was a lot of work. Like after you've been involved in events, like, dude, like the 700 person one was like the bane of my existence. And gosh, like dealing with like speaker contracts and like
George, I used to produce them, not as an event producer, but because my agency, my creative agency partner and I were just always felt so close to the client and to the delivery that when it came to the event or even the production, we produced a lot of content, but whatever it was, we were like, quote unquote, executive producers, but we found ourselves like micromanaging stuff. And it was a tendency that we both had. Neither one of us kind of let go of that stuff. And it was way to our detriment. It was to our detriment personally in terms of what it took us away from, like, and took out of us. And then it was a detriment because we realized, we have to start letting other people do this because there are people for whom this is their thing.
Sure.
This is what they do. Why take that away from the client, So I'm familiar with it.
And at a certain point when they become so big, like what we learned is we either have to decide to create a whole separate company around managing just these events because we can't pull our current team resources into these because it's a lot, as you know. And so the last one that we hosted, we had like Badger's Cooley in there, the Hermosis, we had Lane Norton, we had like, dude, the whole budget was like $190,000, 700 attendees. And it was just like stress the max. I ended up getting sick on day one. I was throwing up all night. And then anyways, long story short, we get to the final day for the pitch, right? Well, we pitched on day 2, we repitched on day 3. And I'd already made up in my mind, this is the last event that we're hosting. So we go through our pitch, goes well. Our operations director comes up to me and he's like, hey man, we just did $1.3 million from stage. I literally walked right up to stage after that and announced the next event.
That's great.
Yeah. But, after then the next event was going to be a year down the road. I'm like, oh, I have plenty of time to worry about that. Like, cool, Well, then as it started to come time to plan it, man, it was just like, I made a decision purely based on money versus like what's best for like you said, what's it pulling you away from? So we got a couple months into planning it and we just shut it down. We ate a bunch of money. We turned it into just a fulfillment event, lost money on it, of course, because we had this we were already like 150 grand deep in expenses, but I was like, I don't want to do this. So anyways, we're done with the big events, at least for now. And we just do the fulfillment events for our clients.
Well, you hit on something really, really important, which is why. What's the purpose of the event? And is it a fulfillment event? And, is it a lead gen event? What's in it for you as the company? That's when it's good to if we had simply looked at this in terms of the deliverable and the reason we were doing things, whether they were sometimes, I mean, by the time we started doing nonprofit events and stuff like that, we were already like, okay, and it's sometimes when people get to the nonprofit part of things, then they do it themselves because they're trying to let all the money go to to benefit the cause. But that's also not good, because we had learned that lesson by then, because we knew that we had to put the end result first, and then figure out how to work backward from
reverse
there.
engineer from there, right? What do you want?
Reverse engineer it. Yeah.
Exactly. That was the best advice I've ever got for planning an event. They're like, you need to put yourself there and think about the experience, the end result, the outcome you want, and then reverse engineer from there. Because otherwise you just start building something that by the time you get to the end result, you're like, I don't even know why we did this.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we learned for sure. That's great advice. It's funny too, man. If I look back on what the big driver was for those events, it's pretty embarrassing. But our number one competitor in the space, he's a friend of mine now, Jason Phillips. They own Nutritional Coaching Institute. He did big events. And I always wanted to be Jason. So he would host an event. He would have 200 people. I want to do 300. He would do 500. I want to do 600. And we just kept like going back and forth like that until eventually he had like 1,000-person event. I was like, bro, you win. I don't want to do it.
Yeah. It's a learning lesson. It's an important thing to reach that level of awareness where you don't. And as you get older, I can tell you that stuff goes away anyway. Yeah. That like we talked about a little before the interview, the next figure is not always money. And certainly it's not always competitive and driven by status or ego. And that's a really great relief.
It is. Yeah, it is.
And what I want to circle back around to, because we started on the personal part, we started on the human journey. How does it feel now to be dealing with these issues that you're dealing with, which may in some ways seem like, oh man, frustrated. We got to do this with events. We got to make this decision about the company. How does that feel relative to what you were struggling with in addiction?
That's a really great question, man. Yeah, really good question, dude. Yeah, it's a great question. I think they're very relatable because in both scenarios, I think we tend to, as people, think too much about how do I solve this problem, right? Like, what's the strategy? What's the secret? What's the silver bullet? What's the thing that I need to figure out in order to solve this problem? And let's compare the two problems. It's either changing terrible habits that are leading towards just destruction, right? It could be addiction, whatever. Or the problem could be like culture issues. It could be, client acquisition, whatever the problem or the constraint is in the business. Both scenarios require, in my opinion, you to instead figure out who you need to become. What's the leader that you need to become? What's the kind of person you need to become in order to solve that problem? Because I could I could come into a business and tell you what the constraint is, look at your data, tell you what the solution is. But if you as a business owner don't have the emotional bandwidth, the patience, the communication skills, if you don't have any of those things, none of that shit matters. And even in addiction, you could put somebody through the best 12-step program in the world, but if they're not emotionally equipped enough to do that, it doesn't matter,
Yeah. And the emotional aptitude and ability and maturity goes so hand in hand with success and business success. And yeah, there are people out there who we know, and I don't mean specific people, but I mean, we all know people is what I meant to say, who are financially and business wise successful, but are emotionally immature. And the story is always the same.
Always the same.
They hit a wall. They're going to hit a wall in terms of what they're accomplishing. And quite often they're going to wake up themselves. They're going to be like, oh man, hopefully they don't have to lose everything and start over. Although I've interviewed many guests on this show where they said, look, I had A, B, C, D, I achieved all these things and I lost it. I lost it all and I had to rebuild it again. But it was definitely sweeter the second time when they had all their emotional maturity and priorities in place, and many fewer people suffering as a result of their success. Because when you're trying to get somewhere simply out of a desperate or dysfunctional need, then it doesn't matter who you hurt. Whereas when you're building it from a place of happiness and excitement and sensitivity, obviously you're pulling so many other people up with you. And that's probably the goal. But I want to give you the last word, Jordan, and kind of I do this. It's funny. I do this on my other podcast, which I had said is a much more of a human interest podcast, but I think it's a really good way to end this interview. Looking to people who are coming up in business, who are maybe just out of college or just coming out of the tail end of their, what I would say, their first learning process, right?
Yeah.
Their first learning cycle in business. What advice would you share?
Yeah, man, I love that question. The best advice that I ever got was like, because I was out of college and I just wanted to start a business. I just wanted to make money, and I had a few early failures trying to do so. And if I think back on why those things failed, it's just because I didn't have the skills to make those things work. And it wasn't until I decided, a mentor said this to me one time, and he was a boss of mine for a company I worked for. He's like, bro, you're 23 years old. If I were you, I would just go work for different companies and get paid to learn, and stop worrying about making money in your 20s. Focus on just gaining the skills and experience. Then in your 30s, you can apply that skills and experience to make money. And then during your 30s, while you're making money, you can start to put that money away in different vehicles that by your mid 40s, late 50s, you don't necessarily have to work. You can build true wealth. And I think what most people do, they do it in reverse. A lot of kids nowadays are coming out of college thinking like, how do I create passive income? It's like, bro, you don't even have the skills to create active income. Why are you thinking about passive? So, and instead of thinking like, well, how do I just start this business, man? But I'm like, bro, like go work for a company or many companies and you get paid to learn. Like it's free. It's literally paid mentorship. Even if it's literally learning how not to be the type of leader that, in this business didn't work. Dude, I think one of the best things you can do is have some really shitty bosses. Like
Yeah,
it teaches
very
you
true.
so much. And so again, just to like recap, I think it would be go work for other companies to learn the skills that you need to maybe go start a company one day.
If you liked the show,
Yes, and
it worked for you,
yes, then
subscribe and leave a
yes, friend.
5-star review.
Yes, friend.
Tell all your friends.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Get your branding here.
Yes, friend.
Did I make it clear?
Yes, friend.
Get your branding on
Yes.
before they're gone.
Yes.